That morning, I watched Diane Hartwell do something that most of our crew only found out about, through rumors, by lunch. She stood at the far end of the site trailer, the one we called the fishbowl because of the windows on 3 sides, and approved the first phase of contractor terminations. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near that trailer. I was there because the ventilation unit above the equipment storage bay had been running hot for a week, and I'd flagged it twice already. So I had my panel kit open on the ground, my multimeter clipped to the housing, and approximately 0 people in hard hats acknowledging I existed. That was how things worked at Caldwell Infrastructure. The people in lanyards made decisions. The people in boots made it possible. Everyone pretended that was fine. Diane didn't look like someone who needed anything from anyone. She wore a white hard hat over a charcoal blazer. Her ID badge turned backward the way executives sometimes did without noticing. Her face calm in a way that made foremen straighten their spines when she passed. I'd seen site supervisors who'd been in construction for 30 years go quiet when she walked through a morning briefing. Not because she raised her voice. I'd never heard her raise her voice, it was something else. She listened like she was sorting useful from useless in real time, and the useless got left behind very fast. Inside the fishbowl, the project lead was talking with his hands. HR had binders. A man in a vest from the parent company's board office kept checking his phone and then pretending he hadn't. Diane said something I couldn't make out through the glass. Then she picked up a pen, signed the last page, and set it back down without ceremony. Nobody in that room looked relieved. That told me what I needed to know. I went back to the ventilation unit, but my jaw stayed tight. By 11, everybody on site had heard. Not specifics yet. Numbers, first phase, possibly more before the next site review. Guys stood around near the lunch trailer talking low. My crew lead Sandro stared at his coffee, like it had personally let him down. Could hit the trades next, he said. Always does eventually, I told him. He didn't laugh. I hadn't meant it as a joke. I'd been with Caldwell 7 years. We built transit infrastructure, LRT extensions, highway overpasses, rail bridge retrofits across southern Ontario. My job was electrical systems. Substations, signal panels, site power. Anything that required someone to understand what they were looking at when a drawing didn't match what was in the ground. I was good at it. I knew I was good at it. And I had the kind of history with Diane Hartwell that made us something other than strangers, though not quite anything else either. 8 months earlier, I'd refused to sign off on a conduit run in the Brampton segment. The project manager at the time had approved the layout. His supervisor had signed it. Permits had been stamped. But the routing went within 4 centimeters of a telecom duct that wasn't on the original drawings. Because nobody had pulled the municipal records. Just the developer's plans. If we'd poured the slab over it and the conduit failed under load, we'd have been looking at a full excavation and a service disruption on a line that moved 40,000 people a day. I documented it. The PM told me to move forward. I documented again and escalated. The file eventually landed on Diane's desk. She came out to the site herself. Not with an entourage. She came with one engineer, asked to see the discrepancy, looked at it for about 90 seconds, and then asked me 2 questions. The first was how I'd found it. The second was why the original survey hadn't caught it. I answered both. She made a call from the site that afternoon and had the routing redesigned within a week. She also had a conversation with the PM that I wasn't present for, but whose outcome became apparent when he stopped giving me work orders by the following month. After that, she knew my name. I knew because when our paths crossed on site, she didn't say electrician. She said Donovan. I lived in Brantford, in a house that was technically too big for 2 people, but which I'd never gotten around to downsizing after the divorce, mostly because my daughter Cora had grown up in it, and I didn't want her coming home on weekends to a different address. She was 9. She had opinions about most things, a collection of rock samples organized by mineral type on her windowsill, and a deep suspicion of any vegetable that wasn't a carrot. She was staying with me that week because her mum was at a conference in Halifax, which meant it was just us, which I preferred anyway. That Thursday evening I was trying to convince Cora that soup could count as a full meal even when there weren't noodles in it, which she disputed on structural grounds. It's just hot water with stuff floating, she said. That's broth. Broth is the foundation. I don't want the foundation. I want the building. Outside, what had started as a freezing rain warning had turned into something worse. January in southern Ontario does that. The roads on the 403 were a mess. My neighbor had already texted me that his car was frozen to the driveway. Cora had school closed the next day and was trying to negotiate staying up until 10 because of it, which I was not going to agree to, but I hadn't told her that yet. My phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't expected. I almost let it go. Then I picked up. This is Donovan. A pause. Whined on the other end, which meant she was outside. It's Diane Hartwell. I'm sorry to call you. People like Diane did not apologize on the phone. I stood up from the table. I've come off the 403 near Powerline Road. Black ice, the car isn't drivable. My colleague was supposed to follow me, but she turned back. Towing is backed up until at least midnight. Are you hurt? No. The car is against a guardrail, airbags didn't deploy. Are you in the car now? Yes. Is it running? No, it won't restart. Then don't keep trying. Don't run the engine if it restarts on its own either. Guardrail means possible exhaust blockage. Stay put. Send me your location. Another pause. I heard the wind again and what might have been her moving in the seat. I remembered you were in this direction, she said. From the Brampton site paperwork, text me the pin. Cora had been watching me from across the table with the fork held up like an antenna. Dad, she said. I covered the phone. I have to go help someone stuck on the highway. Can I come? No, you're staying here. With who? Mrs. Fenwick next door. 30 minutes, maybe less. That was what I believed when I said it. Mrs. Fenwick came over without complaint, in wool socks and a cardigan, carrying a book she didn't open because she and Cora immediately began reorganizing the rock samples by a new classification system that Cora had apparently been developing for weeks. I kissed Cora's hair, said I'd be back fast, and took the truck. The 403 was bad. Not cinematic bad. Southern Ontario in January bad, which is specific and grinding and cold in a way that gets inside your hands even with gloves. Half the highway had been reduced to a single clear lane. The off-ramp near Powerline Road had an OPP cruiser with its lights on and a flare still fizzing in the slush. Diane's car was easy to find, a dark blue SUV, late model, sitting at an angle against the guardrail with the hazards going. I pulled in behind it, put my four-ways on, and walked up. She opened the door before I knocked. The first thing I noticed was what she was wearing. The blazer was still on. The hard hat was gone because of course it was. She hadn't been on a site. But the shoes were wrong for this. Low heels, not ice grade, the kind of footwear that worked fine in a climate-controlled boardroom, and not at all on a January highway shoulder. Come on, I said. Bring whatever you need. I can wait with the vehicle until towing arrives. It's -18 with wind chill and you've got no heat. You're not waiting. She looked at me for a moment. 1 second, maybe 2. Then the wind moved and she stepped out. I got her into the passenger seat and cranked the heat up. She held her hands near the vents with the kind of controlled stillness that made it obvious she wasn't going to admit how cold they were. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. What's downtown like? I have a room booked at the Marriott on King. That's Hamilton. King Street's been closed for 2 hours. I checked my phone before I left. Her jaw shifted. Is there something closer? There's nothing open that isn't booked out. Storm like this, everything between here and the city fills up by 7. She looked through the windshield at the guardrail and the shoulder and the dark beyond it. What do you recommend? My house is 15 minutes in good weather. Tonight, call it 35. It has heat and my daughter is there wondering why her dad took this long for what I told her was a 30-minute errand that got a very small reaction. Not a smile exactly. Just the corner of something. Your daughter, she said. How old? 9. What's her name, Cora? Diane looked out at her car. I don't want to put you out. This isn't a dinner invitation. It's the only option that doesn't involve you sitting in a substation parking lot for 4 hours. All right, she said. The drive home took closer to 50 minutes. She made 2 calls. The first was brief, reporting the car, giving the insurance file number from memory without looking it up. The second was to someone named Philip, and the only part of that conversation I caught clearly was, don't move on the Phase 2 communications until I've looked at the full assessment. Her voice was flat and even, not stressed, just loaded, the way a cable looks fine until you check the amperage. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light was on. There was a sled leaning against the garage, and the recycling bins had blown over and I hadn't gotten to them yet. The front window had a paper snowflake taped to it, slightly lopsided, which Cora had made at school and insisted go up in January because the season wasn't over. Inside, the house smelled like soup and rubber boots, and the particular warmth of a place that's been lived in hard by someone who's not quite tall enough to reach the second shelf yet. Mrs. Fenwick was on the couch with her book open now, because Cora had apparently finished reorganizing and gone back to the soup, which she was eating standing up at the counter with the kind of focused attentions she only applied to things she'd decided mattered. She looked up when we came in. Her eyes went straight past me to Diane. Dad, she said, that's a lot of people. 2 is not a lot. I usually come with 0. Diane stepped in and stopped just past the doorway. I watched her take in the space the way you watch someone adjust to a change in light. The boots piled up near the mat, the school papers on the table, the drawings on the fridge held up with magnets from various provincial parks we'd driven through, the soup pot on the stove, the recycling bag by the back door that hadn't made it outside, the worn spot on the kitchen floor in front of the sink. For a few seconds she looked like someone who'd been handed a map in a language she could read but hadn't spoken in a long time. Sorry about the mess, I said. It's not messy, she said. That wasn't accurate, but I let it go. Mrs. Fenwick put on her coat without being asked, glanced at Diane with polite curiosity, shook her hand when I introduced them, and was out the door inside 4 minutes. She stopped on the porch to tell me the hydro was flickering on her side of the street. I said I'd check the panel. I locked the door and turned back around. Diane hadn't moved far. She was looking at a drawing on the fridge that Cora had done in October. A house with smoke coming out the chimney and 2 figures out front. One tall with a hard hat on, one short with what was supposed to be a magnifying glass. She'd drawn it after I'd brought her to the Brampton site for a Saturday walkthrough because her class was doing a unit on civil engineering. That's from a site visit, I told her. She's put a hard hat on you. She put one on herself too. She wouldn't take it off for 2 days after. Diane looked at the drawing a moment longer than she needed to. You hungry? I asked. I'm fine. The soup's been on since 5. Cora, this is Diane. She got stuck in the storm near the highway. Cora looked at Diane with the full, unfiltered attention she gave to everything she found interesting. Are you a construction person? I oversee construction projects, yes. My dad's an electrician, I know. Cora considered this. Do you have any rocks? I don't think so. You can look at mine if you want. I have a piece of labradorite that does a color thing when you hold it in the light. Diane sat down at the kitchen table, like someone taking a seat at a meeting. They didn't know the agenda for. Cora brought the labradorite and positioned it under the overhead light, and tilted it back and forth while explaining feldspathic composition in terms she'd invented herself, which were not accurate but were very confident. I warmed up the soup and put bread in the toaster. The regular bread, the kind Cora liked because it made better toast even though she could never fully explain why. Diane's phone buzzed, she turned it face down. Rough day? I asked. It's never straightforward when people discover urgency all at once. Layoffs will do that. She looked up at me. I didn't back off. She folded her hands on the table. The first phase went through today. I heard. I imagine you had a response. I set a bowl in front of her. People I've worked with for years are scared. They should be paying attention. They're scared. That's different. That landed in a specific way. I could see it. She looked at the soup and didn't answer. Cora climbed onto the chair beside Diane with the labradorite still in her hand, and the kind of physical comfort with strangers that she'd had since she was about 3, and that I sometimes worried about and sometimes thought was her best quality. Do you want more light on it? She asked Diane. The color thing is better with more light. I can see it, Diane said. It's beautiful. It's called labradorescence. Dad said that word wrong for 2 months. I said it perfectly, I said. You said labradorescence. That's what I said just now. Cora looked at Diane with the expression of someone who had been gaslit for months and was glad to have a witness. Diane's mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Close. They ate soup. Cora talked about her rock collection, and then about the school's ice rink, and then about a documentary she'd seen about the construction of the Confederation Bridge, which she'd watched, that's my suggestion, and which she said was mostly good but too long in the middle. Diane asked a question about the bridge's foundation approach that I would not have thought to ask. Cora answered it with information she'd retained from the documentary, and one detail she'd clearly invented but delivered with equal confidence. That's roughly accurate, Diane said. Cora nodded. I usually am. I washed the bowls after dinner. Diane stood and reached for hers. You don't have to, I said. I can carry a bowl to the sink. The way she said it made me think she'd been told not to touch simple things for a long time, without anyone saying it directly. So I handed her the sponge and didn't make anything of it. Cora pulled a chair over and sat on it backwards, watching us like a foreman on a job she hadn't bid for but was going to supervise regardless. Then the power went. Not with drama. 1 second the overhead light was on and the fridge was humming and the furnace was running. Then none of that. Just the soft blue-white coming through the kitchen window from the snow outside. Cora grabbed my sleeve. I don't like when the house goes quiet like that. I know. The generator in the garage might kick or it might not. We've got the backup propane heater and candles in the second drawer. I hate the second drawer. You hate it because it's disorganized. That's what hate means. Diane had gone still. Not frozen, just waiting, the way someone does when they don't know what their role is. Then she crouched down, slowly bringing herself to Cora's height. It's the same house, she said. We just have to find our way around it in a different order. Cora stared at her, then at me, then back at Diane. Okay, she said. I got the lantern from the mudroom, found the propane heater in the utility room, cracked the kitchen window the right amount, checked the carbon monoxide detector, and moved everyone into the living room where the ceiling was lower, and it would hold heat better. Cora pressed against my side on the couch for about 4 minutes. Then she migrated toward Diane and lifted the edge of the spare blanket with the kind of casual confidence she used when she'd already decided a thing was happening. Diane looked at me. She's offering, I said. Diane sat carefully, one arm held slightly away from Cora like she wasn't sure of the load-bearing capacity. Cora leaned into her anyway and started explaining, unprompted, the difference between sedimentary and igneous rock formation. The candles made the room smaller and softer, without the phone glow and the overhead lights, without whatever Diane's face usually had to manage at the office. She looked different. Not softer exactly, just less armored. Like the armor was still there but she'd set it down nearby instead of wearing it. Tell the one about the escaped lizard, Cora said. That's not a real story, I said. It is. It was one gecko that got behind the radiator for 2 days when she was 6, but it's still a story. So I told it wrong on purpose, making the gecko a reluctant hero navigating the hidden civilization behind the baseboards. Cora corrected me every few sentences. Her corrections got slower, then the pauses between them got longer, then her head slid sideways against Diane's arm and she was asleep. Diane didn't move. You can breathe, I said. I am breathing. Not much. She looked down at Cora. She falls asleep like she's decided to, she said. She does everything like she's decided to. Diane was quiet a moment. Does she ever get scared? Of the dark, the storm, strangers in the house? Sure, she just doesn't let it stop her. That seemed to sit with Diane in a way I hadn't expected. I carried Cora to her bed and came back to find Diane standing in the kitchen, looking at the family photo on the counter. It was one of those framed prints you get made at a pharmacy when you finally get around to it. Cora at a beach in Sobel, maybe 4 years old, her mum on one side and me on the other, everyone squinting in the same direction. She didn't ask right away. I put the camp stove on the counter and made tea. She sat at the table with both hands around the mug, which I'd appreciated. People who want something to hold on to reach for a mug. People who want to appear like they don't need anything don't. The woman in the photo, she said. That's Leanne. We separated 3 years ago. I'm sorry. We weren't wrong to, I said. We were just different people by the end of it. And we stayed 2 years past when we should have figured that out. She's good. She's a good mum. We're better at being on the same team than we were at being in the same house. Diane looked at the mug. That's a mature thing to say. I've had time to get there. She was quiet for a moment. My ex-husband and I were similar. She paused like she was choosing whether to say the next part. He was a good person. We just wanted very different things by the time we had the language to say it. What did you want? She looked at the candle between us. To matter in a way I could measure. He wanted a life that didn't have a performance review. Were you wrong? No, neither was he. I thought about that. Outside, the wind moved against the siding and somewhere down the street a transformer box popped. Cora didn't stir, I said. The reason people on my crew are scared isn't just the money. It's that they can't see the logic. Nobody's explained what the criteria are. It looks like cost centers to them. Lines on a spreadsheet. Diane's hands tightened on the mug. I know how it looks. I know you know how it looks. That's different from knowing why it looks that way. She held my eyes. The wind pressed against the window. I have to answer to a board that bought 3 underperforming contracts in 18 months, and then treats the overrun as an operational problem, instead of a procurement problem, she said. I can argue for people all I want, but if the company misses its covenant thresholds, the bank doesn't negotiate, they appoint a receiver. And a receiver doesn't know anyone's name. I believe you, I said. That surprised her. I don't think you enjoy this, I said. I think you're comfortable enough with distance that you've stopped checking what the distance costs. Her jaw moved. I work better with distance. Maybe. But there's a difference between useful distance and not looking. She turned toward the window. The power stayed out. After a while, I moved everyone's coats closer to the propane heater so they'd be warm by morning. At some point, I fell asleep in the armchair. When I woke, it was still dark and Diane was awake, sitting with her mug empty and both hands flat on the table, looking at the drawings on the fridge in the candle's last light. Her face was open in a way I hadn't seen before. Not soft, just unguarded. Like something in the room had gotten past the gate she normally kept closed, and she hadn't caught it in time. She didn't know I was watching. I closed my eyes again and let her have it. Morning was pale and slow. The storm had eased but not stopped. The drifts were above the bottom porch rail. My phone showed 1 bar and a dozen site notifications I wasn't going to deal with until after coffee. Looks like you're here for a while, I said. Cora was awake before me, sitting on the kitchen floor in her socks, already reorganizing a binder of mineral identification cards she had gotten for Christmas. She looked up at Diane. Do you want pancakes? That's not a weather report, I said. Daddy makes them a little burned in the middle. I make them caramelized. They're the same thing. I made pancakes on the camp stove, uneven because the heat was off-center, and Diane poured syrup for Cora without asking how much and used more than she needed. Cora looked up at her like she'd passed an important test. After breakfast, Cora decided Diane needed to help with the snow fort that she'd been planning since October, and hadn't been able to start because of bad timing. I said it was too cold. She said a real fort required cold. Diane watched our argument with the expression of someone who'd mediated larger disputes and found this one refreshingly clear. We found Cora's spare snow pants in the bin, an old toque of mine, and one of my flannel-lined work shirts for Diane because her blazer wasn't built for this. The shirt was too big on her and she stood in the mudroom looking genuinely uncertain what to do with the sleeves, until Cora showed her how to roll them. Outside was the specific brightness you only get after a serious Ontario snowfall, everything white and overlit and weirdly quiet, the kind of day where sounds don't travel. Cora stomped out paths across the yard. Diane stood still for a moment, and I thought she might hold herself back, but then Cora handed her a plastic container and told her to pack snow into it firmly, or the wall wouldn't hold, and Diane packed snow into it firmly. The structural integrity has to be consistent, Cora said. Diane pressed the snow with the heel of her palm. I know something about that. Cora nodded. Are you an engineer? No, but I work with them. My dad works with engineers, but he says he's the one who has to tell them when they're wrong. I didn't say it quite like that, I said. You said it exactly like that. Diane looked at me. I laughed first. Then she did, not much, not loud, but real. Cora grinned and went back to packing walls. By the time the roads opened, the fort had 2 walls and a doorway and a flag made from a stick and a piece of orange construction tape Cora had found in the garage. We came inside cold and damp. Diane hung her mittens on the hook by the door without me telling her to. Cora corrected her technique and Diane adjusted without comment. I checked the regional road closures on my phone. The 403 wasn't clear, but the 403 wasn't the only option. I said quietly. Elliot Marsh is on that first list, isn't he? Diane went still. He's been on my crew 3 years. He's the one who caught the water ingress issue in the Brantford segment last spring before the rebar corroded. He did it by smell, not instruments. Smell. That's confidential. That means yes. She said nothing. His wife had a baby 6 weeks ago. He was supposed to start his parental leave in March. She looked at the counter. I said, Kezia Ewan has been on the panel work since the project started. She can troubleshoot a fault in a switchgear cabinet that 2 field engineers called unrepairable. You lose her, you hire a contractor. You'll spend more and get less and call her in 6 months. Anyway, I know their files, you know their files, you don't know them. Her face tightened. I kept going. You know what happens when you patch a connection that needs a full replacement? It holds for a while. Looks like it worked. Then it fails exactly when you need it most. Usually in the worst weather, usually at the worst hour, and you spend twice what you'd have spent in the first place. People aren't different. Cora looked up from the counter where she was eating crackers. What's a shell? She asked. I turned to look at her. You said the company would be a shell. That's something that looks like the real thing but doesn't have anything in it anymore, I said. She thought about it. Like when you think a chip bag has chips in it but it's just air? Yeah, exactly like that. Cora nodded like that was obvious and went back to her crackers. Diane stared at the table. At the stack of Cora's books on the corner, at the frost on the bottom of the kitchen window. At nothing in particular. I could see the words had found something in her she was working to keep shut. She didn't look angry. She looked like someone standing in a room they'd walked into without meaning to, who now wasn't sure what leaving would cost. That evening, just before the power flickered back on, Cora brought Diane a drawing she'd made during the afternoon. 3 figures in front of a snow fort. Me on one side, Cora in the middle, a tall woman in a flannel shirt on the other side. Above it she'd written in careful block letters, "The Fort Team." Diane looked at it for a long moment. Cora leaned against the arm of the couch. That's you. I can see that. You can put it somewhere if you want, like at work. Diane folded it once, carefully along the margin. I might. You could also come back and see the fort before it melts, Cora said. It's going to be good. We're not done. The lights came on. The fridge hummed. The furnace started up with that shudder it always had in winter, like it was remembering it had a job. Diane held the drawing and didn't look relieved, the way you might expect. She looked like the returning light had made something visible that was going to be harder to put aside, now that she could see it clearly. By the second morning the storm had moved east and taken the worst of itself with it. The roads were terrible and the roads were clearing. Those 2 things can both be true in Ontario, and they usually are. The sky was the color of old concrete and the air had that dry cold. That means the temperature's dropping even as the sun comes out. I was shoveling the front walk when Diane came outside. She had her phone. That meant the signal was back. That meant the outside world had found her again. She looked different than she had the day before. Not worse, just pulled. Like she'd been standing in 2 places at once, and the gap between them had just gotten measurable. Board call's been moved to this afternoon, she said. I kept shoveling. You said Friday. That was before Philip got hold of the updated liability projections. I stopped. I didn't know Philip, but I knew the type. How much deeper does he want to go? She looked at the plow line at the end of the driveway. Another 12% across field operations and technical support. I set the shovel down and looked at her. Field operations and technical support. That's a precise way to say the people who make the thing actually work. It isn't that simple. It's never that simple when you're on the end that's simplifying it. Her face sharpened. You think I haven't spent 20 years in this industry? I think you've spent 20 years in it from a direction that doesn't always face the same way mine does. She held my look. The wind moved her hair. Cora's face appeared in the window, both palms flat on the glass. Nicole looked away first. I have to get to the call, I know. My assistant found a tow company for the car. There's a GO train running from Brantford Station. I can drive you. I started shoveling again, harder than I needed to. Donovan, I didn't answer. I didn't set the budget targets. I didn't build the acquisition strategy that put us in this position. I inherited a company with 2 bad contracts and a board that wants to see the pain in 1 quarter and call it discipline. I turned around, and the pain gets distributed to Elliot and Kazia and the 6 other people on that list. You get to call it restructuring. They get to explain it to their landlords. You're making this personal. It is personal. It got personal when you signed that page. Her eyes went bright, not from emotion she'd let out, from emotion she wouldn't. A company with 400 field staff cannot be managed from a kitchen table. No. But maybe it shouldn't be managed like nobody at the kitchen table exists. She stood very still. I'd said more than I should have. More than an employee says to a CEO in their own driveway, with their daughter watching through the window. But Diane had sat in the dark with us. She'd pressed snow into a plastic container, because Cora told her to, and accepted the correction on her technique. She'd held a drawing like it was something fragile, and I could see the old machinery in her starting up again. The controlled language, the managed distance, the clean framing that made hard things look like math. I didn't want to watch it replace what had been there an hour ago. She looked at the shovel in my hands, then at the fort in the side yard, already slightly lopsided in the morning sun. You think I can walk into that call and tell them I changed my mind because of a snow fort and a 9-year-old who knows what labradorescence means? No. Good. I think you can walk in there and stop pretending the criteria are neutral. Her face changed, not angry, tired. Specifically tired, the way people get when they've been doing the right thing in the wrong direction for too long. You make it sound possible. I didn't say easy. She looked at me for a moment longer. Then Cora opened the front door. She was in her coat, toque sideways, a pair of mittens in each hand. Diane, she said, you forgot these. They were by the heaters. Thank you. You have to come back and finish the fort, Cora said. The door isn't done, I know, okay, that was just information. Diane looked at Cora for a moment. The fort's northeast wall might need a buttress, she said, if it's going to hold weight. Cora's face went serious. I was thinking that too. The drive to the Brantford station took 20 minutes because the city plows had done a reasonable job on the main routes, which felt like a minor miracle. Cora stayed with Mrs. Fenwick very happily because Mrs. Fenwick let her reorganize things. Diane rode beside me without much conversation for the first few kilometers. She'd changed back into her work clothes but still had my shirt on underneath because hers hadn't dried, and the collar stuck out above her lapel in a way that made the whole careful presentation look slightly disassembled. Her phone kept going. Philip. Legal. HR Finance. Project leads. She answered one. Keep the notices on hold, she said. I said keep them on hold. I'll be on the call in 90 minutes. She hung up and looked out the window. They already had the packages ready, she said. Of course they did. Is that HR? I asked. She nodded. She opened her bag and took out a small notebook. What's the name of the man on your crew? The one with the baby, Elliot Marsh. And the woman, the switchgear, Kezia UN. She wrote that too. How long has she been with Caldwell? 4 years. But she came from Hydro One. She knows the provincial grid standards from the inside out. Her pen slowed for a moment. Then she kept writing. This doesn't change the math, she said. I know. Then why am I writing it down? Because if you're going to talk about headcount, you should have to picture heads. She put the pen down, looked out at the highway. At the station, the lot was half cleared and the platform had a small group of people who all looked like they'd been through their own version of the last 2 days. She checked the board. The train was on time, which felt remarkable. She stood by the truck door for a moment. Donovan, she said. I waited. I don't know if I can hold this. Holding it might not be the right frame. She looked at me. The wind blew across the lot. What is, I said. Make them say the criteria out loud. Don't let it stay in clean language. If they want to cut Elliot Marsh, they have to say why Elliot Marsh and not the vendor management fee they've been renewing for 3 years. Make them say it. She was quiet. You know your company better than anyone in that call does, I said. You know where the money actually is and where the problems actually started. Use it. She looked down at the notebook, at the 2 names in it. Then she said, I still have your shirt, keep it. You're not dressed for the platform. She glanced down. The collar was still visible above her coat. She didn't fix it. She walked to the platform and got on the train without looking back. I watched until the doors closed. That should have been the end of it. it wasn't. I got home to Cora at the kitchen table drawing a revised fort plan with structural annotations, which she'd labeled in her own invented system of symbols. She looked up when I came in. Did she get there okay? She got on the train. Is she going to fix it? I don't know, kiddo. She has our names, Cora said. She wrote them down. I looked at my daughter. She wrote down our names when she left, Cora said. I saw her. That means she's going to think about us. I didn't answer that because I didn't have anything to add to it. The afternoon was quiet. I shoveled the back walk. I called Sandro and didn't tell him anything useful. He asked whether I'd heard anything and I said no, and that was true. He asked if I thought it was going to be as bad as it looked and I said I didn't know. He went quiet in the way people do when they want you to have a better answer. At around 4 my phone buzzed. It was a message, no greeting. Just what's the file number on the Brantford segment water ingress report from last spring? The one you escalated. I knew exactly which one. I sent the file number back. 3 dots a kitchen for a moment. Then I sat down. Cora came in from the living room. Is that her? What did she say? I looked at the message. She said thank you. Cora sat down across from me. Is that good? I think so. I sent one more message. Don't let them make the numbers the only argument. They never are. A long pause. I put the phone down and started making dinner. It buzzed once more. I know. I'll use ours. I stared at that for a while. What did she say? Cora asked, leaning over. She said she'll use ours. Use our what? Our argument, I said. Our reasons. Cora thought about this. That's good? Our reasons are good? Yeah, I said. They are. At 6:20, Diane walked back into Caldwell Infrastructure's head office in Mississauga, looking exactly like the person everyone in that building expected her to be. Blazer straight. Badge flipped right side. No wasted movement. The lobby was cold from the revolving door, and the cleaning crew was mopping a slush trail someone had tracked in from the parking deck. 2 project managers saw her and immediately became very interested in their phones. Everybody knew what the call was about. You don't have to announce a thing like that when the whole company already has its ears up. She didn't stop at her office. She went straight to the boardroom. Philip was already inside, along with legal, finance, the HR director, and 2 representatives from the parent company's investment arm. Philip was in his 60s, silver hair, the kind of calm that comes from never having had to explain a decision to someone who'd be hurt by it in a way he could see. Diane, he said. Glad you made it through. I did. She set her folder on the table. Inside it were her notes, the file number I'd given her, and the drawing Cora had made, folded, visible at the edge, not shown to anyone. Just there, the updated Phase 2 proposal is not my recommendation, she said. The room adjusted. Philip's face stayed arranged. The deeper reduction in field operations and technical support is rejected. Rejected by whom? By management. This management, me. He smiled with only the front part of his face. Diane, we've been through the projections. She opened her laptop. Yes. I've also been through the retention cost model for the last 4 years, which nobody pulled because nobody asked. Let me show you where we actually lose money when we cut technical staff and then hire contractors to do the same work at 1.5 times the cost 6 months later. She started with the money. She knew that was the only way to get the room to stay open long enough for the rest. She showed the covenant timing. She showed the gap between where the budget problem actually started. Procurement decisions 2 years earlier. A vendor contract renewal that should have been renegotiated, and where the current proposal was placing the consequence. She showed the contractor dependency data from 2 other project phases, where they'd cut internal staff and spent more in the following year than they'd saved. Then she said, I want to talk about executive compensation. The HR director sat forward. Senior leadership. Salary reduction of 15% for 12 months. Deferred performance bonuses. No exceptions. Philip said, that's a gesture. It's $4.2 million annualized. What it's not is symbolic. She moved through it methodically. Vendor renegotiation on 2 active contracts where the relationship value gave Caldwell leverage they hadn't used. A planned Mississauga office expansion that could be deferred 18 months. A consulting contract in the strategy division that had been renewed 3 times without a deliverable review. Then she came to the field staff. Cutting experienced technical personnel reduces this quarter's payroll expense and increases next year's fault response time, contractor costs, training overhead, and project risk on active sites. She clicked to a chart. This is the cost comparison from the Barrie segment when we reduced the electrical team by 3 people in 2021, and then contracted back equivalent capacity through Q3 and Q4. The net cost was higher. The schedule slippage cost us a penalty clause. The finance lead looked at the chart. These numbers are conservative, Diane said. I used your model. I just ran it forward. He didn't answer. Elliot Marsh has been on the Brantford for 3 years, she said. He identified water ingress in a rebar section last spring before any instrument flagged it. The documentation is in file 2023-BR-114. If we'd missed it, we'd have been looking at a structural remediation on a live site. The cost estimate from engineering was between $600,000 and $1.2 million. He caught it by walking the site. She looked around the table. Kezia Yuan has been doing panel work since the project started. She has 4 years with us and 7 years prior at Hydro One. She knows the provincial grid standards from the inside out. If you want to replace her, you'll spend 6 months finding someone with half her knowledge and pay a recruiter $12,000 for the introduction. Philip tapped his pen. We can't run a company on individual cases. You can't run a company on averages that hide the individual cases either. His smile held. The market wants margin improvement. Your plan delays that. The market wants the project delivered on time and on budget. My plan gives us a better chance of that than cutting the people who make delivery possible. Your position is not guaranteed. She looked at him directly. Neither is yours if this project hits a penalty clause, because we stripped the field team in January. That landed. The fight went for 90 minutes. Philip pressed every gap. Legal raised disclosure concerns. Finance questioned the timeline. One of the investment reps asked whether the executive compensation reduction would affect their fee arrangement, which told Diane everything about where his priorities were. She answered everything. Not flawlessly. There were moments where the numbers were soft, and she knew it and said so. But she knew the company's actual physiology, the load-bearing elements, the ones that looked robust in a spreadsheet and failed in the field, the places where money was actually draining versus where it looked like it was draining. She'd been doing this a long time, and the difference between her and Philip was that she'd been on site enough to know what sites were actually like. At the end, Philip called for a vote to proceed with the original Phase 2 reduction. The finance lead abstained. The HR director voted against. The investment reps split. The motion failed. The alternative, Diane's revised plan, contingent on 48 hours of finance review and an immediate hold on termination notices, passed. Philip closed his folder. You've given yourself 2 days. I've given the company 2 days to do its job correctly. He left without saying anything further. Diane sat in the boardroom after everyone else had gone. Philip was wrong about a lot of things. He wasn't wrong that the next 48 hours were going to be hard, or that the vote could still shift, or that her position had a fixed amount of goodwill left in it and she'd just spent some. But Elliot Marsh had found water ingress in a rebar wall by walking the site on a cold morning, and someone had almost buried that in a file no one looked at. And she hadn't let that happen, and that was not nothing. She took out her phone. I was under Cora's bathroom sink trying to fix a slow drain when my phone buzzed on the floor beside me. The message said, "Notices are on hold. Revised plan passed for review." 48 hours, I read it twice. Then I came out from under the sink. Cora was sitting on the closed toilet lid watching me work. She looked at my face. Is it her? Yeah. What did she say? I showed her the message. She read it carefully. What does 48 hours mean? It means 2 days. Is that good? I thought about it. Yeah, 2 days is good. 2 days is more than she was supposed to get. Cora looked at the phone. She should come back and see the fort, maybe. She has Dad's shirt still. I know, so she'll have to. I put the phone down and went back under the sink, but I couldn't focus. The drain was still slow. My wrench kept slipping. And I kept thinking about Diane in a boardroom in Mississauga, with a drawing in her folder and 2 names in a notebook, and the specific knowledge that the criteria had to be said out loud before they could be challenged. Headlights came up the driveway just before 8. Cora was already in her pajamas and I'd told her that was final. But she heard the car before I did, and had her boots on over her pajama pants before I'd gotten to the window. She's here, Cora said. She brought something. How do you know she brought something? The bag, Cora said, as if I was describing a gap in my reasoning. Diane came to the door carrying a paper bag and my folded shirt over one arm. She looked like a person who'd been through something and hadn't slept enough, which was accurate. But she was standing straight and her eyes were clear. Cora opened the door. Did you win? She asked. Diane looked at her. I got 2 days. Cora thought about it. That's a weird kind of winning. It is, Diane said. Did you bring food? Diane lifted the bag. Butter tarts from a place on Queen Street in Brantford that she'd passed on the way and stopped at, which was not nothing given the day she'd had. Cora's face went reverent. Those are the best kind. Inside, Diane gave me back the shirt. Our hands touched for less than a second. I washed it, she said. That was risky. It might hold the structural integrity. She laughed. It was tired and real and completely unmanaged. Cora ate 1 butter tart and was told that was the limit until tomorrow. And she accepted this with the resignation of someone who knew the law and was registering her dissent for the record. Diane had coffee at the kitchen table. I leaned against the counter. The 3 of us talked about the fort, the northeast wall issue, the door placement, what Cora called the strategic weakness on the east side. At one point, Diane looked at the drawing on the fridge, the one with the hard hat people. That's still the best one, she said. Cora looked up from her drawing. I can make you a new one with the fort. Okay, Cora said, like that answered a different question than I'd asked. After Cora went to bed, Diane and I stayed at the kitchen table. No storm this time, no ice on the roads. She could have left whenever she wanted. That made the staying mean something different. She said, some people are still going to lose their jobs. I want to be honest about that. Not Elliot, not Kezia, but some roles won't survive the review. I can't promise a clean ending. I know, I said. Does that bother you? I said, you showed up with the criteria, you made them say the names. That's different from what it was going to be. She looked at her coffee. I've been running a certain way for a long time, she said. It worked. I want you to know it worked. I kept projects alive. I kept people employed who wouldn't have been employed if I hadn't made hard calls. But, she folded her hands. I built the distance in and called it professionalism. And then I sat in your kitchen in the dark and your daughter asked me what kind of pet I had. And I told her I had a lot of meetings. And she told you that wasn't a pet. She looked at me. She's right, I know. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm not here to replace something. I know that too. I'm here because I drove past a bakery and thought, butter tarts. That's all. That's a good reason. She looked at me with the exact expression of someone who wasn't sure if they were about to say something real or find a way not to. I said it first. Come back when the fort's finished. Cora's been waiting on that door since October. Diane nodded once, slowly. Okay, and bring butter tarts, she smiled. I'll negotiate. Cora's tougher than your board. She looked at me, and for the second in the dark 2 nights ago, when she'd been reading the names off a notepad while Cora slept, something was present in the room that neither of us had named. I didn't name it now either, but I didn't look away from it. The next weeks didn't simplify. The finance review held, but it was close. Philip found an ally in one of the investment reps and pushed again on the contractor cost model, and Diane had to fight it a second time with better numbers, and 2 additional data points from the project history. She called me once during that week, not for anything personal. She wanted the exact date of the Brantford water ingress inspection, which was in the file but which the finance team was disputing as anomalous. I gave her the date. She used it. Some people left. 3 roles in project administration where the overlap was real and the case for them couldn't be made the same way. Diane didn't pretend otherwise. Elliot Marsh went on parental leave in March as planned. Kezia Ewan took on an expanded panel role that had been sitting vacant. The Brantford segment came in 11 days ahead of schedule, which isn't something that makes the news, but is the kind of thing that changes what the next project looks like. Diane came back on a Saturday in February. The fort was almost gone by then. A week of mild weather had done most of the work, but the outline of it was still visible in the yard, the compressed snow where the walls had been. Cora led her around the perimeter and narrated the entire construction process, like she was presenting to a committee. Diane asked 2 genuine questions and one that I was pretty sure she already knew the answer to, just to keep Cora going. We had soup again afterward. The same pot, more or less. Cora explained labradoressence again in case Diane had forgotten. I haven't, Diane said. Good, some people need it explained twice. She looked at me over Cora's head. I washed the dishes. Diane dried them. Cora sat on the counter which I allowed on Saturdays and talked about a book she was reading about the construction of the CN Tower. They had to invent new techniques, she said. There wasn't a plan. Diane handed me a dry pot. That's usually how the important things go. Outside, what was left of the snow was the gray-brown kind that means March is thinking about it. The kitchen was warm. The furnace ran steady. The drawings on the fridge had a new one now. The fort team, updated with better proportions and a flag that was actually recognizable. Diane leaned her shoulder against mine at the sink, just briefly, not making anything of it. Just there. Cora didn't notice or noticed and decided it was not relevant to the CN Tower conversation. I didn't make anything of it either. But I didn't move away. And the house held the 3 of us the way it had been holding Cora and me for years. Not because it was perfect. Not because everything in it worked the way it was supposed to. But because it had learned to hold the weight of the people inside it. And maybe that was enough to start with. And maybe starting was the whole point.